Episode of the Thrive with Asbury Seminary podcast. I'm your host, Heidi E. Wilcox, bringing you conversations with authors, thought leaders, and people just like you who are looking to connect where your passion meets the world's deep need. Today on the podcast, I got to talk to Dr. Sue Russell, Professor of Mission and Contextual Studies at Asbury Seminary. Prior to coming to the seminary, Dr. Russell was the Associate Professor of Anthropology and the Chair of the Department of Anthropology at Biola University. And before that, she spent 17 years in cross-cultural ministry and field research with Wycliffe Bible Translators in Southeast Asia, where she worked with a committee of national pastors to complete the translation of the whole Bible into the Tagal language. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about her call to ministry, and we talk about her book, Relationshift, changing the conversation about men and women in the church. This book focuses on relationships, specifically brother-sister type relationships that are based on love, humility, and mutuality rather than specific roles. So we talk about what that means and what that can look like in our context. Let's listen. Dr. Russell, I am so glad to get to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being on the Thrive with Asbury Seminary podcast. Even though we're doing this remotely, it is so good to see your face through the video feature. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for asking me. I enjoy being able to talk, and I get excited about things that God is teaching me. So this is fun. Thank you.
My burning question, we're here to talk about other things, but one of my burning questions is, I want to know about your time as a forest firefighter.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into that. When I was growing up, I had three goals. I wanted to play professional baseball. I didn't know that girls weren't allowed to, but I wanted to play professional baseball. I wanted to be a firefighter. And I wanted to be a mountaineering instructor. How I got that, I have no idea. I grew up in the middle of Southern California, big urban center, but I always loved the mountains. So when I was in college, I was a forest management major. I always wanted to be outdoors, so that made sense to have a career that was outdoors. And part of being a forest management major is we have opportunities to work for the Forest Service. And it turned out it was, I don't know if it was the first year or it was very new, around Title IX, things really opened up for women. And so it was the first time they were allowing women on the fire crew. So I was one of two women on a 20 person fire crew. And so there was a little bit of pushback from some of the guys. They were okay with us doing the day-to-day stuff. Like we did a lot of once people had a timber cut, we would come in and we would clean it and get it ready for burning. But one of the things the guys would say, especially one of the older guys would say, women shouldn't be allowed to go on project fires. Project fires are fires that are larger than 1,000 acres, and they usually last more than one day. So you're usually on the fire line several days. And so he just thought women didn't have the capacity to do that. So during the summer, we got called to one of those project fires, except it wasn't. We got called to an area. They had a lightning strike, one of these dry lightning, and we arrived, our fire crew arrived, and the fire boss said, we don't know if we have 10 or 1,000 fires. So we just spent the day running around putting out small fires, and we watched as the fire across the ridge grew bigger and bigger, and that was our project fire. So we were sent over there. It was up to 6,000 acres. And so when you're on a fire, you're on 24/7. On a project fire, then you're on usually 22 hours, and you then go back and eat and sleep and then back on the fire. So usually in the early morning hours, they kind of calculate where they need crews. So it's just exhausting work, and you're on the fire line. Sometimes you're sleeping on the fire line. But for 10 days, we were fighting this fire. And we were maybe, at the time, there was probably 1,000 fire crew total, and there were maybe 30 women. So it was
Wow.
quite unusual. But after we got done, I kept up with the guys. The other gal kept up with the guys. If the guys carried 80 pounds of water up the hill, I carried 80 pounds of water up the hill. In fact, I outlasted a lot of the guys, just because I had done hiking and that kind of stuff. So after that, the same guy, and he came up to me, and he's like, "Well, some women can be on project fires." Um, but anyway, so he kind of, it was like, okay, we had proved ourselves that we could keep up. We weren't a burden. We actually were helping. My other fun thing is we had a crew from the South, because again, we had a very high burn season. And so I was working with another guy, and we had the portable fire truck. And so we had 500 gallons of water, and we 4-wheel drive. So we were driving to different hot spots and putting water on them. So there was a Southern fire crew that we were going to, and there's maybe a little 4-inch sapling in our way. And so I just got out of the truck, grabbed the axe, and chopped it down in a couple strokes, and got back in the car, and we got to them and got the water. And about 4 hours later, we came back around to them, and their fire boss just kind of saddled up to me and said, "I just want you to know that my boys gave you an A+ on that." so so it was fun. And again, I had never been in a situation where my gender, if I could do the skills, ever prohibited me from. Now there was skepticism: can the woman do the job? And once you demonstrated you could do the job, there was, I mean, as a fire management major, there weren't very many women. Out of a class of 50, there'd be 2 of us. And I always told people the guys were really polite, as they would open the door as long as you were carrying the equipment.
Yeah, for sure.
So during that, and even then, I was able to go to National Outdoor Leadership School and actually do mountaineering for 30 days in the Rocky Mountains. And it was a school, and that's where I wanted to be a instructor. And I was asked back to come back to their instructor school. Again, it was my gender didn't hold me back from being asked to come back and do the school to become one of their instructors. So I even played on the boys' baseball team in high school. Again, the guys were like, they'd come up to me and go, "Yeah, you're pretty good for a girl." you know, so in my life, I've participated in things that once you demonstrated you could do something, there wasn't a barrier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what changed for you? Because you're Associate Professor of Anthropology and chair of the at Asbury Seminary. Do I have that right? If I don't,
Yeah, yeah.
correct me. But yeah, like you're a professor at the seminary now. So what changed your mind? Because that's a completely opposite career path.
Yeah. Well, my 4th year of university, actually she came out the 3rd year. There was this new kid on our softball team, and I'm still in contact with her, but she was this little squirt, and she was going out from my position. And what she didn't know is I was the all conference catcher. And so she wasn't gonna really get my position, but my coach asked me to train her as my backup if I got injured. So she so impressed me. I mean, she worked harder than all of us, and she wore this ichthus on her shirt, right? So she was this, but she just loved all of us. I mean, she just loved us. And I remember thinking, I got to find out more about this person. And so we just had these long conversations. She never shared with me. She told me she was just too intimidated. As a catcher, you have to be kind of intimidating. And she was just too intimidated of me. But she told me later that she and the director of Campus Crusade used to sit outside my dorm window and pray for me.
Wow.
So the next year we became roommates because we were staying up till all hours talking anyway. And I just remember, so she started this Bible study called 10 Steps to Christian Maturity, but she skipped the first one. And I, being very competitive, decided I was going to do the same Bible study, but faster and better than her. So I started with the one that she skipped, which was How to Know Christ Personally. So there in my room, all by myself, she had gone. I just was overwhelmed with Christ's love.
Oh,
And I just asked Christ into my life then, and so it just transformed me, and I found myself reading scripture, and then um, her name at the time was Jeannie Bogroff. It's now Ganzel. Actually, we're still friends after 40 years,
that's
but
awesome.
she discipled me. I mean, here I am, kind of the tomboy, and she was like the Barbie, and God just sent her into my life, and she just loved on me. And she'd come to every home game. She didn't know a thing about softball, but she'd come to every home game. And do you know, by the end of that season, half the team were Christians,
Wow. That's
just
incredible.
because, just because this loving presence, never preaching, but loving presence, just discipling us, just being there. Um, she even learned rock climbing because that was kind of my thing. And so, we had this little discipleship group, and it's like, okay, so who's going to teach us how to do rock climbing today? So I took them all out and, showed them how to, do some stuff with ropes. And so anyway, that was kind of fun. But it was during that time that God really, I sensed this. I just kind of have a pause. I wanted to use my gifts and talents and my interests to reach people. I mean, and I thought, as a forest manager, we were trained to be forest rangers. I wouldn't really have a lot of contact with people, which was my original idea of being a forest ranger, just kind of being out in the forest on a horse and by myself, enjoying nature. Um, so I began to really pray about what the Lord would have for me. And so I really felt that God was three criteria. I wanted to be involved in evangelism discipleship. I was a crew baby. That's what we did. I loved doing it. And I wanted to use the gifts and talents and training that God had given me. I figured my passions and training and stuff. And then I really wasn't interested in going overseas. I'd never been overseas. I mean, Tijuana on the border, but that's it. Um, but I had discipled a Chinese gal from Taiwan. I said, if you're going to send me, I think China. So I just laid those before him, and I looked at different things, even like management and, should I do a business management, a master's? I dismissed Bible translation because I hated languages. Um, now that I've had to
Oh,
study
the
not.
irony.
I know, don't ever do that. Um, but I happened to be in our house, and I lived with 7 other women, other people involved in crew, and I never seen it before, but she got the Wycliffe little magazine, and it had this big thing on. It said "Lost," and somebody had gotten lost at jungle camp, and they had to do a search. And I'm reading and going, "Oh my goodness, they're doing it all wrong." I had been trained in search and rescue, and I thought, well, maybe they could use someone like me who could train missionaries to how to do wilderness stuff and can't, search and rescue and surviving in the wilderness, because I love doing that.
Yeah.
So I sent in the coupon into Wycliffe, for more information. They sent me all this stuff back. Of course, I began reading. I thought, what a great way to do evangelism, but to go up to someone and say, what is John 3:16? Just read John 3:16. And then what a great way to do discipleship, but to go through the whole New Testament with somebody, verse by verse, as you're translating and discussing. I thought, okay, but I don't do languages. So being obedient, I had a, a friend in church whose daughter was in Wycliffe. So I said, can I have lunch with you? Um, talk more about Wycliffe. I figured God would close the door. And in the middle of this lunch, out of the blue, the guy asked me, are you good at math?
Huh.
And math had always been my best subject. I
Yeah.
love math. And he said, if you're good at math, you'll be good at the linguistic analysis that's involved in Bible translation.
And
And I
you
was
were
like,
like, this is not the
no,
door shutting.
oh no, 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 oh no. Well, I knew China. Wycliffe was not working at China at that time, right? So I'm safe. So, so spring break, first time in 6 years, I went back to Southern California. My roommates were coming down here, so I went. And since we were only a few miles from then the Wycliffe headquarters, I asked if I could interview. I mean, I'm pursuing this until God completely shuts the door. So I interview and find out more. And he says, would you like to come to chapel? I'm going, sure, I'll come to chapel. And who should be there but Kenneth Pike, returning from his trip from China and discussing the possibility of Wycliffe working in China in the near future. So, so off I went, sent in my stuff. I knew nothing. That's as much. I didn't know you took 3 semesters of graduate linguistic training. I thought one semester I get to go to the field. But I did. So within 2 years, we were on the field. So I had a colleague. I was one of those, I was really involved in our churches. So I didn't have to go raise support. People came to me, and the
Wow, that's
churches,
awesome.
I had been involved in churches, and that's the thing I tell students. I said, be involved in churches. They knew me. I
Mhm.
I I was their new Christian, asked all the questions as new Christian. So by within 3 years, and that includes language school, we found ourselves in Southeast Asia, and we both felt like we wanted to work with a group that were already Christians, because we felt that we should be more facilitators. And this is before people were talking about partnership or facilitation. This is early 80s. And but so there was a church who had been Christians like 40 years and still didn't have translation. They were the largest of their language family, and we just felt called to that. So we started our language and culture learning and spent a couple years. And then my colleague had been corresponding with somebody she met. So anyway, she left to get married. And that's when we had a sponsoring agency say, we're going to fund this. And so I went back. So realized I had only been a Christian, 3 or 4 years
Wow.
before I went to the field, right? And so I'm working with all these amazing elders and Christians. So, you know, because we were in a close country, a sensitive country, we were there working under the state museum, and we could translate things of high moral value.
Okay.
But we were working on linguistic and anthropological projects for the museum, doing what we call language development, recording the language, writing it. I was doing literacy in the village, and doing things like preservation of language and anthropological studies. There aren't very many categories for a white Westerner Christian in their culture.
Right.
So they wanted to call me missionary. I'm going, no, 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 you cannot call me that. And so they wanted to call me pastor. I said, no, 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 can't call me that. So they came up with Ali. Ali
What does that
means
mean?
younger sister.
Okay.
So I had to learn to become a younger sister. So these guys were my older brothers. And so as a young single woman, even just young single, I had no say in that culture, and my resources were used by the elders. And so I had to learn how to work within as a younger sister in that culture, which meant I wasn't in charge. And that's a whole nother story about just the committee bringing revival to the area. And it became a community owned, the translation committee was able to pool the resources of these 60 little village churches spread over like 15 days hike. And God used them to bring revival and to complete translation. And I got to be socialized by these amazing Christians. So my Christianity was very different. I saw things through their worldview. One of it was like the spirit world, where healing, I've never noticed how many times Jesus healed somebody by casting out a demon,
Mhm.
until I'm living in a culture that heals people by casting out demons, their question is, who's going to protect me from the spirit? So I got to watch them burn the black magic kits and baptize people. And also, it's very community oriented. Your resources belong to the community. When I came back with my first doctorate, they all sat around, these elders, and they're all talking. And the conversation was, what are we going to do with our doctorate?
Wow. No individualism whatsoever.
Well, you do have individual, but I mean, it's sort of you are part of the community. This is a resource that you contribute.
Right. That's what I mean, kind of. It sounds very
It's not
different
my
than.
resource; it's our resource.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
really awesome. Yeah.
So, anyway, so that's kind of the background. And we completed that. I'll go on to how I ended up in the States and married to David. So we do yearly planning because we're out in the village. So our directors kind of want to see what we're doing in the year. And I was doing my yearly planning and discovered I was done. Old Testament was drafted. New Testament had been complete. I'm like, first time I don't have a long-term commitment. 15 years. I no longer have a long-term commitment. So I'm thinking God's going to do something new. So I had met David while I was doing my doctorate, and we liked each other, but he wasn't called to overseas, and so I just thought, So during that year, my mother became critically ill, so I flew home, and the day after she was out of critical care, one of the professors who had mentored me had a heart attack. So I had been his TA, and it was 2 weeks before school. So I helped him grade. I had jumped
Mhm.
in and finished up his grades. And the day I finished grading, I was eating a pizza, and here comes this guy. David comes by. I mean, he's
Uh-huh.
way across campus. I'm supposed to be 10,000 miles away. And that moment, this is my last day on campus. I'm leaving. Here he comes. And he's kind of like, "What you doing?" And it's like, "Well, I've finished. I'll be finishing up." He heard finished, and turns out he didn't want to date a missionary because he wasn't called, and he didn't want to say that because he didn't want me to. So he had just disappeared. But he heard
Oh.
finished. He heard finished. He's like, "You want to go out?"
Oh, I love that. He heard finish and he heard let's get started.
So anyway, it kind of really put David in a dilemma because I didn't want to go back until my mom was out of the hospital. She was doing long-term physical therapy. And so poor David didn't know if he should pray for my mom to get well or pray that I would stay longer. So anyway, after that 2 months, so I went back to the field because I was a senior member, so I had a lot of responsibility that I needed to kind of train people into. So part of the conversation is how do you say goodbye after 15 years to people who have become like family? So
Right.
I asked if my husband would consider buying my elder brother a water buffalo. So
Yeah.
imagine you're there and I'm here, right? And you're going, "Oh, what?" And that's exactly what he did. So anyway, the long story short, he came out, and we went out to my village, and he paid the full bride wealth for me that was customary for Christians. And as soon as he paid bride wealth, the expectation is I would go back to his village because that also. So it was just an amazing way to close a 15-year ministry
Yeah.
um, with that community. And
Yeah.
David was an honorable person for paying bride wealth when he didn't have to. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so that kind of closed that, kind of. But the impact on my worldview as a Christian, um, I tell people I may look American, but I'm not. I'm a Tagal Christian. That's where
Yeah.
I was socialized as a Christian. So
Yeah.
it did give me a different view of culture and scriptures. Kind of gave me bigger prism. It kind of gave me different ways of looking at scripture.
Right. And your book, Relationshift, changing the conversation about men and women in the church, it seems like it would pull a lot from that because you talk about developing brother sister type relationships, basing things on gifts, not not gender or not us versus them type mentality. So, why did you and Dr. Rose choose to write Relationship Shift?
Yeah, I began teaching at Biola, so in Southern California, and my students would say things to me. I taught gender, I taught anthropology of gender, and I taught women in development. So I would have students come into those classes and say things. I'm going, where did you come up with something like that? So I began to track it down, and that's the first time I discovered this whole complementary egalitarian debate. I had never heard of it until I came to that Christian college. So I began reading. That began my journey of reading. And I'll be honest, as an anthropologist, I would see them start biblical and then slide into a cultural explanation. So
Mhm.
something that we're saying was biblical was really cultural. And they would be talking about roles. And as an anthropologist, we have very distinct ways of talking about roles that are attached to status. And I looked through scripture and I didn't see anything that really talked about roles in the way that I understood them.
Mhm.
So I was reading scripture not only through a theological, because I was doing my MDiv and THM, but through a Tagal and an anthropological view, and just seeing this whole debate not making sense.
Right.
Um, and just saying, because there are each of the sides, I fully affirm women in ministry, but the egalitarian and the complement both deal with changing structure. So in
Interesting.
other words, if somebody came and taught complementarian to the Tagal church, they would have to completely change the ways that they were doing things, because they it was a matter of gifts and talents, not gender. If you had the gifts and talents, you did it. And
Yeah.
a lot of the women had less obligations, so they went to Bible school.
Interesting.
So they were the teachers, but they also, if they were young, were under the elders like everyone else. So the elders had this resource of somebody with Bible knowledge. And so it was just very odd to me to see this debate. And so I began to do papers on it and trying to sort out some of this, but I just didn't find a satisfactory way to talk about
Mhm.
it, because when you look at it, it seems contradictory. Galatians 3:28 and then Ephesians. Paul seems to be contradictory, and some people reject Ephesians because, Paul couldn't write that because I'm like, no, there's something going on. Because I was involved in this anthropology and biblical studies conversation, I felt like I needed to get my doctorate in biblical studies. But I also wanted to include my anthropology. It turns out that the person who headed up the history of early Christianity program at UCLA was one of the founders of what they call the Context Group.
Oh, wow.
So, and that was the group that was using anthropological models and New Testament studies. So I went and talked to him, and he was like really excited to have a trained anthropologist in the program. And so I thought I would write on gender, but classical studies to really do it right, like some of Cindy West, some of these people who really have studied classical texts a long time. That was a young person's game, and I just so I kind of set aside. I did some papers and explored some ways of looking at it, and just never came up with something. And I'm sitting in a seminar class, and Dr. Parchi talked about the values in an honor and shame culture, and he listed all these values. And then he looked at Pauline values for relationships and for,
Mhm.
again, men. And I looked at those two lists. And I saw, I've seen those two lists before.
Yeah.
And those two lists were what an anthropologist called Victor Turner used when he was talking about rites and passage. And so I have to back up. In rites of passage, those are transitions, like it would be marriage, would be a rite of passage. And
Mm-hmm.
what they discovered is that there's 3 stages. There's a stage where you're separated from society, so you leave your former status. So kind of when you're engaged, it's kind of, you're
Mm-hmm.
no longer single, but you're not married. So you're engaged. And it's this weird stage. And so that's what he called liminal. It's this
Mm-hmm.
between and betwixt. So this is where you get to know each other. But what he found in rites of passage, that's where status doesn't matter. So
Interesting.
wealthy, poor, they're all the same, and they have a different kind of relationships. It's a mutual based on person relationships. It's called communitas. And then in rites of passage, you have then another stage called reincorporation. So you go through the marriage ceremony, and the last thing the pastor does is turn you around and say, I'd like to introduce to you the new Mr. and Mrs. Russell, right?
Yes.
That's you're reincorporated. Now you're in society with this new status of
Mm-hmm.
married. And so it was this liminal period. So what Turner does is these 2 ends, when you're in status, is called structure. So you relate by status. For instance, we're in status in Asbury, and churches too. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
um, I can walk into a fellow faculty, Stevie Brola. I can walk into his office. We can go off. No appointment necessary. If he's there, I can just walk in.
Right.
Now, with the dean, who has a different schedule, I mean, he's open to it, but there's an appointment. However, with the president, you're not gonna, there's because of the status,
Right. Right.
there's a different way you behave. That's called
Mm-hmm.
structure. That we behave based on these relationships of our statuses, whether it's wealth or educate. In class, students call me Dr. Russell.
Mm-hmm.
Outside, I mean, people here don't call me Dr. Russell because we're not in the same structure, right?
Right.
So, right. And same, so there's certain behavior based on the structure that we're in that's expected.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Victor Turner calls that structure. Anti-structure is where those statuses no longer matter. We relate. So it's kind of the Galatians 3:28. And for me, it was like, oh my goodness, it's both and. We're to live this new, and that's what it, we talk about these dual identities in Christianity. And for instance, we talk about the kingdom being here, but not yet. So it's a temporal duality, right? We're living in the new, but also living in the old. We're doing it both, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for time.
Right.
And same with our spirit, right? So we have the Holy Spirit, but it's still in the old flesh. And Paul talks a lot about that, but we're going to get something else when the resurrection or we die. So it's the same thing on the social level.
Mm-hmm.
We are to live these new types of relationship that Paul talks so much about, right? He talks so much about how to live with one another, how to love one another, how to, look at all the one another's. That's this mutual relationship. Paul has a lot of one another's, love one another, care for one another. That's the Galatians 3:28 in Christ, right? There's not free
Yeah.
slave. We relate one anotherly, no matter what our status is. However,
Right.
we still have to live in status. And so we
Right.
have
So how do we do both?
we have to live a new way within our status. So let's take back to so what we do is we redefine. So what Paul was doing in Ephesus with the household code, he wasn't reinforcing the household code as complementarians would argue. He was redefining it to one of mutuality within a hierarchy. So hierarchy was transformed from power and exclusion to service and inclusion.
Okay, so we have to use our gifts and our status to help other people.
Right. So this, like, for instance, talking about privilege, right? There's a lot of talk about privilege. And people
Yes.
are going, well, I'm going, no, don't be afraid of privilege, because what privilege means is you have access to resources and stuff that others don't. how can you use your access
Mm-hmm.
to include others? I have benefited so many times from my male colleagues saying, hey, the person who you need to contact is Sue Russell. Hey, she's the one who's an expert on this. A lot of my writing comes from male colleagues who have invited me and opened doors for me.
Uh-huh.
My mentor, he opened the door into the context group. So anyway, the book. So the the first thing was my dissertation, which I look at this concept from Jesus, and it's kind of fun to talk about Jesus. If you look at him, there's often these opposites in status. My favorite one is the sinful woman, right? And Simon the Pharisee,
Mm-hmm.
where Jesus is over at the meal, and so you have Simon, who's high status. He's male, he's pure, right? He's a
Mm-hmm.
Pharisee. And you have this very low status woman who is, all we know is she's a sinner. So kind of the opposite of purity, sinner, and a woman. So kind of opposite status. But look at what they do. So, and often in that story, we focus on the forgiveness aspect, right? She comes in and wets his hair and wipes it with her tears and puts oil on his feet. And
Mm-hmm.
what Jesus rebukes Simon for doing is basically, this goes into all honor and shame stuff, but basically Simon did not honor Jesus at the meal. He didn't give a kiss. He didn't give oil. He didn't wash his feet. So here's somebody
Uh-huh.
who is high status, who dishonored Jesus with his actions.
Mm-hmm.
Here is somebody who would have a dishonorable status or low status,
Mm-hmm.
who acted honorably toward Jesus, and who gets forgiven. It's the person with low status. And we see that contrast all through the stories in Jesus, where you would have somebody who would expect it to be honored because of their status, but acts dishonorably towards Jesus. Anyway, that was my dissertation, and I saw this duality, right? It's how we behave, how we treat one another within our status. We can't escape our
Mm-hmm.
status. And even in the early church, you had rich, you had poor, you had women, you had men. It wasn't bad to be wealthy. It's you were to use that wealth for the church. And just
Right.
as Jesus was like, what are we going to do with our doctorate? Um,
Right. Right. So, one of the things you mentioned in your book is that women, at least in Bible times, are put into a category rather than seen as individuals. And so, although Jesus never directly, talked about relationships between men and women, how did his interaction with women change their status?
yeah, absolutely. Let me back up a little. Um,
Okay.
so because it's part of a broader narrative. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So in Genesis, actually, it starts in Genesis. This whole us them, right? So when the woman, when God creates the woman, what does Adam say? Right? The first thing he says is, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She's one of
Mm-hmm.
me. But what happens in the fall?
This woman you gave me.
That's right. All of a sudden, the woman is the other.
Right.
So, and then we also see that Cain and Abel, am I my
Mm-hmm.
brother's keeper? So what sin
Mm-hmm.
does is make us them. And what happens when society gets more complex, these become classes of people. So we talk about
Mm,
those women. I was in a
right.
church fellowship when I heard that women are more, when somebody was giving an explanation about why women shouldn't preach, well, women are more deceived and da da da. And so here I am sitting with 3 doctorates going, am I more deceived with somebody than maybe has never read scripture?
Right.
And you wonder, and right? So my thought was, would you say Sue is more deceived? So if you
Right.
can't say that about an individual, you shouldn't be saying it about a group,
Right.
right?
Right.
S- So
And
what
it's
Jesus did in his, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say,
Yeah,
and it's not just, gender, but it's anytime it's us, them kind of language. It's if it's not all, then don't say it about all.
That's right. Talk about individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is we can easily dehumanize people by talking about
Absolutely.
categories. You know, we have a lot of people who are unhomed here.
Mm-hmm.
And if we talk about homeless, they become they become a problem. They become a category. And all of a sudden, they're not one of us. But if we talk about somebody who's lost their home, man, aren't we all just one major emergency? You know, many people are just one major emergency, a loss, mental health, tragedy
For sure.
from losing our home, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But when we put people in category and we say those people, those homeless people, you know, you can think of, you put whoever you want in that category. The moment you put people in category, you've dehumanized them.
And that's a scary
Um,
place to be. Yeah.
yeah, but that's, you know, we talk, and I could go into social identity theory and how we do that in our narratives. So in our narratives, we create otherness. So we talk about people in terms that make them less like us if we want to exclude them, or more like
Uh-huh.
them. So a lot of the narrative in the complementary dialogue is to make women less like men, make the more distinction between men and women. Now there are,
Uh-huh.
but to be honest, how that's perceived varies culturally.
Mm-hmm.
Some, you know, so there are differences between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But if you're making a point to make an other, you're going to make women so very different than men, so that you can make your point about how men and women are different. Therefore, right? Um,
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, in our book, Jackie actually came and found me. I had kind of presented these ideas and figured I was done with them, and she actually tracked me down. I mean, she spent a year tracking me down. Um, I'm not much on social media, but she managed to find me, and she asked me to come speak to. She has a podcast with her Marcella group, which is empowering women. Um, and she does amazing things on that, and talks about, right now she's talking about body image, and very powerful
Mm-hmm.
podcast. We got to talking, she asked me to speak, and then the women, you know, I talked about this, you know, what we call the big word social dementia of inaugurated eschatology, and how you know, the Galatians 3:28, we didn't have to be complementary, you know, it's not either or, you know. So women in hierarchical structure, you don't have to dismantle hierarchy, but you transform hierarchy. You change the meaning of hierarchy. It's very difficult. You know, it is.
Yeah.
Power
Anyway, go ahead.
relationship. What's
Yes.
that?
That's always
Yeah.
tricky. I was just gonna say, because your book, one thing I found interesting is your book is neither complementarian nor egalitarian. It turns it all on its head.
Yeah. No, we say, you know, it comes from my perspective that the Bible doesn't talk about roles. It talks
Mhm.
about relationships.
Mhm.
And so we come from that perspective. How should we behave towards one another? What does that look like? You
Yeah.
know, like I said, Paul talks so much about one anotherly. And then if you understand Paul, he's very missional as well. So often the places where there are prohibitions with women, it's in contexts where the church is very public.
Okay.
And so and that's how I approached even the Timothy passage.
Yes.
I approached it actually. Fred Long had a paper that really helped with that. But I had to ask. Paul is missional, and often when he talks about women, it's for a missional purpose. So the question I had to ask when I approached Timothy, so I did. I laid out my assumptions. Here are my assumptions. Paul is missional. There was something going on that would distract from the main messages of the church. Again, right? So
Right.
when I'm a missionary in a culture, you know, in some places, you know, in Tagal culture, I could never wear shorts. I could never wear short sleeves. You just don't, because that would be a
Uh-huh.
distraction, right? So there are
Mhm.
things I didn't do that I had the freedom to do, but I didn't because it was inappropriate in that culture. Wearing long sleeves in other cultures, how I behaved in government office with officials, you know,
Mhm.
we did things that were missional because we didn't want anything to distract from the message of the gospel.
Right.
And we still do that, right? We still do that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I had to ask myself, what was distracting? What was the problem in Ephesus? Because Ephesus was a crazy place. So I asked, what was distracting from the missional outreach of the
Mm-hmm.
church? And
Yeah.
that's how I approached that passage.
Yeah.
Because you have to interpret it based on the whole of Scripture and all of Scripture, where we see relationships are important. So how is this disrupting the relationships in the community or the church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciated your approach to all of that because I've heard different people talk about Paul, and some like him, some, don't like him at all. And he just kind of gets a bad rap sometimes, I feel like. But the way you addressed what you called the prickly passage in First Timothy 2:11 through 15, I found especially enlightening as you talked about it from the lens of culture and how Paul was trying to help take people from where they were to what he believed was God's hope for humanity. So, how do Paul's writings reflect an understanding of liminality or living here but on the way to somewhere else?
Yeah, I think the household codes are a really good example of that. He wasn't dismantling that household code, right? He didn't say, okay, now you're going to, but he completely transformed it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, the household code would be women submit, children submit, slaves submit. But now there's this mutuality, submit to one another. He spends a lot more ink on men, on the husband, right? I want to get
Right,
a t-shirt for my husband, love, serve, die, because basically that, right? That's what he tells
right,
husbands to do, love, serve, die.
right.
And so Paul was showing in this very hierarchical culture how to relate one anotherly and transform it. So now hierarchy was not domination, but one of service. So the more power you have, the more people you serve. I love this. One of my friends became dean, and he was I always pictured him as a golden retriever, just one of these really nice guys. And I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe you did that. For him to step into the position of dean, a brilliant scholar too. So I was just like, "What are you thinking?" And he was a good friend, so I could ask him this. But I asked him, I said, "What were you thinking?" And I'll never forget his response. He said, I have been served by the dean for so many years, and we just felt, that it was our turn to serve the faculty." And I
Oh,
thought,
wow.
that's the answer you want from your boss, right?
For sure.
I took
Yeah,
this position to serve. That just transforms hierarchy, right? So,
it
how do
does.
I apply it to my life? As a professor, as I'm thinking in my courses, I'm thinking, how am I going to serve my students?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so in the assignments, how is the assignment going to serve my student in their professional development? So not busy work, but there's really thought into how does this serve my students? Right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
professors, we kind of set what we're going to do for assignments. And I love it. When I was interviewing at undergraduate, my first job, the president asked every single faculty in their interview, how will students know that they love you, that you love them?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that transforms our job, right? How am I going to
Mm-hmm.
love and serve my students? Now, that doesn't mean like, oh yeah, you can turn in papers late and that kind of stuff, because that doesn't serve you well, right?
Right.
That's not serving you well. But it is. It transforms how we view when we're in a position of, say, power over
Mm-hmm.
people. God gives us those positions because we're ready to serve more people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would it look
You
like
know,
if individuals and the church started applying, not that they're not, but started applying these principles even more?
yeah, I think then it kind of transforms the what pastors do on its head. Um, so it's like how, again, Paul talks about equipping the saints. So it's saying, how are people in my church serving their community, and how can I serve them to serve the community? Right? So,
Right.
like all the teachers, how can we as a church serve you so you can do your job better? Say healthcare professionals, how can we serve you so that you can do your ministry better? And it's also looking at vocation as missional, right?
Uh-huh.
So God
Yeah.
has called us into these vocations to be finished. I mean, that's one of the things I had to look coming from the mission field, that my calling hadn't changed to make disciples. My vocation changed, but I'm
Right.
still making disciples. So our vocation may change. So how are people in different vocations? Can we help them make disciples? How can we serve them? So I think it's just, again, when you have access to resources, when you have access to privilege, if you will, I mean, that kind of gets tossed around. How do you use that to serve others? So like for me, how can I serve my students? So like when I know there's conferences and things and I have opportunity to invite students into those conferences,
Mm-hmm.
um, trying to do those kinds of things, how can my networks help serve my students? So I'm not a pastor, so I've never have been. I've always been an academic. So even when I was chair of the anthropology department, I made sure I figured out how to serve my faculty. So I had one of my faculty. He's brilliant. I mean, he still is brilliant, just totally brilliant. So he did really well in these very technical upper division courses. So I taught all the lower division generalized courses so that he could teach where he really, really excelled.
Uh-huh.
And neither of them really liked doing the advising. So I did all the advising. So I did kind of all the things to free them up to do what they did best.
Right.
Uh, So
Right.
it was not like using, okay, you guys are going to do the advising, I'm going to teach these. It was like, okay, how can I serve this person so that they can use their gifts and talents that God has given them?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. One of the other things that you mentioned, because we've talked about using privilege to empower others, sharing our gifts, respecting other people. But I want to talk. One of the things you mentioned is not fearing our sexuality as we live our lives. So, can you expound more on that and what that means and how we can do that?
Yeah, in this culture, it's very difficult. Every once, when I was teaching undergraduates, I would ask them their programs that they were watching, and I'd watch them because people are learning more about sexuality from media than they are from the church,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, what media says is, you know, you can have sex with everyone, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Love's not an issue. Just, one night stands, whatever, whoever, male, female, just so sexual attraction is the big thing. So the scriptures are just the opposite, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
viewing every man and woman as brothers and sisters, we do not have sex with. So there isn't even an idea of sex with a brother and sister. So if we're looking at men and women as our brothers and sisters, then we have incest rules, right? We have rules that says
Right.
you cannot have sex with your sister and brother, and that's what I'm seeing. If that's how we view one another versus a potential sexual partner, which
Mm-hmm.
our media is teaching us that everyone's a
Right.
potential sexual partner, right? Married, not married, young, old, whatever. That's the opposite of what Scripture's teaching us.
Right,
So,
right, and I like the story that you told in your book about, or maybe it was, Dr. Rose who told that, but about being in class and
oh
needing
yeah,
a ride to class. Yeah, yeah. Tell us
yeah,
tell us
yeah.
just, like, briefly, just a
Well,
little about
it's
that.
really her story to tell, and she tells it so well. But the hesitation, when you're the only woman. Now, to be honest, I faced it more in Christian circles than I did in secular circles. I worked with
Really?
men on the fire line. I worked
Yeah,
with men, and I don't know why it was never a problem. And again, that's a little bit 40 years ago. there wasn't so much sexualization of our culture. I mean, you watch any program today, and it's basically everyone's a potential sexual partner. Okay, so again, but that we have this kind of danger. Women are
Like, yeah.
dangerous.
Yes.
And we have this in our culture, in our Christian culture. And so if you're alone with a woman, oh my goodness, there's potential for, you know. And so when she was asking for a ride, nobody wanted to give her a ride because they're all afraid to be alone with a woman, right? It's good.
Right.
And she's like, I don't want to have sex with you. I just want to ride, and sometimes we have to state that, but it does hurt women. This whole idea that every woman is a potential sexual partner, because that means you can't be mentored by men. Again, you have to be wise. I tell my students, okay, so I teach undergraduate students, right? And they're like, oh, it just happened. I'm like, look, if you're out in a public place, it's not going to just happen. It's like, be wise, guys. If you're alone in a dorm room, and it's kind of, come on. Again, I learned that from the Tagal, where they didn't expect people to have personal boundaries. So there was always a chaperone whenever there were
Interesting.
a youth group. And that was the big thing, is like,
whenever
the youth were going to do the questions parents asked are, who are the chaperones?
Okay. Interesting.
So there just wasn't, because there wasn't this, again, it was external boundaries is how they kept. Usually if there was any kind of premarital sex, the parents were like, oh, it's our fault because we didn't chaperone them well enough.
Okay.
In Western culture, we expect to have this internal boundary. And so I tell students, look, if you're in public, nothing's going to happen. So, but I did learn about, again, learning from the Tagal that, what kind of positions we put ourselves in too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so meet with a couple women and couple guys if you want to mentor, if that's an issue, because there is a reputation, because everybody assumes everybody's a potential sexual partner. I remember the first time, again, it was the same friend, and I had just come back from the field, and I was in his office and the door was closed. I'm like, I had to physically say, this is okay, because I would never be alone in a room with a man in that
In the
culture.
Toggle. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if I was going somewhere with Jimmy, there was always one of his kids with us, in the
Oh,
car.
yeah.
So what would I say? I think mentally, this is where we really need to, be so countercultural and just say, unless God is really leading you into a marriage type relationship, then everyone else is not a potential sexual partner. It's just, and if you're married, you don't even consider it.
But if we're all brothers and sisters, we have more freedom
Absolutely.
in, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Russell, this conversation has been a delight. We've talked about so many things. I have one question I ask everyone, but is there
Okay.
anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't already talked about?
No, I appreciate being able to just talk about this. Again, for pastors listening there, realize I have been more in academia, and so they're going to have to translate it contextually to their church, their work, because I appreciate all of the people, because it's such a difficult time, and
It
such a
really is.
difficult, just in this culture and discipling people. And so my prayer for folks is that we could start this new conversation. We could start and looking at, be aware of how we talk about groups of people and groups. And so it's a good lesson for me too. I have to
Mhm.
be continually reminded about it.
Yeah.
So no,
Yeah,
I
for
love
sure.
Asbury. Because this is a great environment to talk about some of these things.
Well, the one question we ask everyone, because the show is called the Thrive with Asbury Seminary podcast, what is one practice, one thing you're doing that is helping you thrive in your life right now?
There's two things. Let me do
Okay.
one's spiritual, one's physical. One of the things I do is